The weeks after my parents' funeral were quiet, but they were not peaceful. Briggs and I tried to keep our daily routine because it was the only thing that made the empty house feel a little less lonely. Every morning he fed the chickens while I watered my mother's flower garden. We cooked dinner together every evening, just as we had when our parents were alive. Living together was never about convenience. It was about keeping our family together and honoring the life our parents had built with so much love and sacrifice. Even though we were both getting older, we were healthy enough to take care of ourselves and the property. We never asked anyone for money or help. Still, I noticed that more relatives started dropping by without much reason. They smiled politely, looked around the house, and asked strange questions about repairs, taxes, and insurance. Their interest didn't feel natural. Briggs noticed it too, but he believed everyone was simply worried about us after our loss. I wanted to believe that as well, yet something deep inside told me there was another reason for their sudden kindness. One afternoon I walked into the kitchen and found Kellen talking quietly with Corinne. The moment they saw me, both of them stopped speaking and forced awkward smiles. Corinne quickly changed the subject and left a few minutes later. Kellen brushed it off, saying they were discussing family matters that weren't important enough to bother me with. His answer didn't comfort me. Instead, it left me with a growing feeling that I was being kept outside conversations that somehow involved my own future. That uneasy feeling stayed with me long after everyone had gone home. A few days later, Kellen placed a stack of estate papers on the dining room table and asked me to sign them. He said the paperwork would make future legal matters easier and save us from unnecessary stress. I asked to read everything first, but he smiled and said the documents were routine and that his attorney had already checked them. Something about his confidence made me uncomfortable, so I told him I wanted more time before signing anything. He looked annoyed for just a second before hiding it behind another calm smile. From that day on, he kept bringing up the subject whenever we were alone. He also started mentioning that Briggs had become slower and more forgetful, saying it might be dangerous for him to handle financial decisions. I knew that wasn't true because my brother still balanced the household bills, kept detailed records, and never missed an appointment. Corinne also changed the way she acted around us. She arrived with homemade meals and kind words, but every visit turned into questions about the property taxes, the land value, and where important papers were stored. She even asked whether Briggs had considered moving into an assisted living community. Briggs answered politely, but after she left, he admitted her questions felt strange. Neither of us understood why everyone suddenly cared so much about our finances. The peaceful home we had worked so hard to maintain no longer felt safe. Every conversation seemed to carry a hidden purpose, and I found myself watching the people closest to me more carefully than ever before. The next family meeting took place at our farmhouse, and the atmosphere felt tense from the moment everyone arrived. Instead of talking about how we were doing, the conversation quickly turned to money and the future of the property. One relative after another insisted that selling the house was the most practical choice. They claimed the land was worth a fortune and said it made no sense for two older people to live there alone. They spoke as if Briggs and I were no longer capable of making our own decisions. Briggs stayed calm and reminded everyone that our parents had always wanted the farmhouse to remain our home for the rest of our lives. He said we were managing the bills, maintaining the property, and asking nothing from anyone. His words should have ended the discussion, but they only made the arguments stronger. To my surprise, Kellen agreed with Corinne and repeated that selling now would be the smartest financial decision. He barely looked at me while speaking, as though my opinion no longer mattered. When I tried to explain why the house meant so much to us, several family members dismissed my feelings as emotional thinking. I felt completely alone, sitting beside the man who was supposed to stand with me no matter what. By the time everyone left, I understood something I had been refusing to accept. They were not trying to protect Briggs and me from future problems. They wanted us to step aside so they could control the property and benefit from everything our parents had spent their lives building. 3 days after the family gathering, a certified letter arrived in the mail. I opened it expecting another estate document, but my hands started shaking as I read the first page. It officially stated that legal action had been filed to remove Briggs and me from the farmhouse. I could hardly believe anyone in our own family had gone that far. Briggs read every page carefully while I tried to understand how this had happened. Attached to the filing were copies of documents that appeared to include my approval for decisions I had never agreed to. Some pages even carried a signature that looked like mine, but I knew I had never signed those papers. We immediately contacted a local attorney, who advised us not to respond before he reviewed everything. He warned us that mistakes or false information in estate cases could have serious consequences. When relatives called, they acted as if the lawsuit was unfortunate but unavoidable, saying we would only waste money by fighting it. Kellen played the role of a caring husband whenever others were around, telling everyone he was worried about my health because of the stress. Once we were alone, his attitude completely changed. He repeatedly told me the case was already decided and that resisting would only make things harder for everyone. He urged me to leave the house quietly before the court forced us out. Listening to him, I felt a painful question growing inside me. Was he trying to protect me, or was he trying to make sure I never discovered what was really happening? The following morning, Briggs suggested we search every cabinet, drawer, and storage box our father had used to keep important records. Our attorney had asked us to gather anything connected to the property, no matter how old it seemed. After several hours, Briggs unlocked a small drawer in our father's desk that neither of us had opened since his passing. Hidden beneath old tax receipts was a sealed envelope with both of our names written across the front. Inside, we found neatly organized papers that had been signed years before our parents became seriously ill. The documents clearly explained that the farmhouse was protected so Briggs and I could continue living there for the rest of our lives. There were also written instructions saying no relative had the authority to remove us while either of us was still alive. Our attorney carefully compared those records with the papers used in the eviction case. He quickly pointed out several differences in the handwriting and signatures. He also noticed dates that did not match the official filing history. The more he examined the documents, the more concerned he became. He told us there was enough evidence to question whether some of the newer paperwork had been altered after our parents died. Hearing those words gave me hope for the first time since the lawsuit began. We finally had something solid to defend ourselves with. Instead of feeling powerless, Briggs and I realized the truth had been waiting inside our own home all along, and now it was finally starting to come to light. A few days later, our attorney asked Briggs and me to come to his office because he had finished reviewing the records. He explained that financial documents, property filings, and witness statements all pointed to the same disturbing conclusion. Kellen and Corinne had been working together long before the eviction case was filed. They had quietly built a plan to convince relatives that Briggs and I were no longer able to care for ourselves. Once the court accepted that idea, they expected the farmhouse to be sold and the money divided between those supporting the challenge. My attorney also showed me proof that Kellen had gained access to private family records through our marriage and shared information that should have remained confidential. Every conversation, every question, and every suggestion he had made suddenly carried a different meaning. I realized his kindness had often been a way to collect details that could later be used against us. The weight of that truth was almost impossible to carry. I had trusted him with my family, my home, and my future, never imagining he was helping build the case that could leave Briggs and me without a place to live. I sat there unable to speak while Briggs quietly placed his hand on my shoulder. He didn't need to say anything because he understood exactly how deeply I had been hurt. In that moment, I accepted that the greatest loss was not the legal battle. It was discovering that the person I loved had chosen greed over our marriage. After leaving the attorney's office, I made a promise to myself that I would not let my emotions ruin our chance to win. I stayed calm whenever Kellen was around and acted as though I had accepted that the lawsuit could not be stopped. He seemed satisfied with my quiet attitude and slowly became less careful about what he said and did. That gave our attorney more time to continue building the case without attracting attention. Briggs and I focused on collecting every piece of evidence that showed we had been living responsibly for years. We obtained updated medical reports confirming that we were physically healthy and mentally capable of making our own decisions. We also organized years of financial records proving that every tax bill, utility payment, and maintenance expense had been paid on time without help from anyone else. Our attorney arranged for handwriting experts to examine the questioned signatures and prepared witnesses who knew our parents' true wishes. Step by step, the case against us became weaker while the evidence supporting us became stronger. Although I still felt the pain of Kellen's betrayal, I no longer allowed it to control my thinking. Each document we found reminded me that the truth was on our side. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could picture a future where Briggs and I would still be living in the farmhouse our parents loved. That hope gave me the strength to keep moving forward and wait patiently for the day everything would finally be revealed. The mediation session was held before the case could move to a full trial. Everyone involved sat around one long table, while the mediator explained that each side would have a chance to present its position. Kellen and Corinne spoke first with complete confidence. They repeated that selling the farmhouse was the only reasonable solution and claimed Briggs and I were refusing to face reality. They acted as though the outcome had already been decided in their favor. When it was our turn, our attorney calmly opened several folders and began presenting the evidence one piece at a time. He introduced the original estate documents, explained how they protected our right to remain in the home, and showed the expert reports proving the questioned signatures were not genuine. He also presented financial records, showing exactly who would receive the largest share of the money if the farmhouse were sold. The room became completely silent as the facts replaced the false stories that had been repeated for months. Several relatives looked shocked because they had believed everything Kellen and Corinne had told them. Even the mediator asked difficult questions that neither of them could answer clearly. Their confidence slowly disappeared as they struggled to explain the inconsistencies in the paperwork. By the end of the meeting, it was obvious that the case was no longer about two elderly siblings refusing to move. It had become a clear example of deception driven by personal financial gain, and everyone in the room could finally see it. The final court hearing arrived a few weeks after mediation failed to reach an agreement. Briggs and I sat quietly beside our attorney while the judge carefully reviewed every document that had been submitted. After listening to both sides and examining the evidence, the judge announced that the papers used to support the eviction could not be trusted. Those documents were removed from the case, and the request to force us out of our home was denied. The judge also criticized the actions of those who had tried to misuse the legal system for their own benefit. During questioning, Corinne struggled to explain the differences between her earlier statements and the evidence presented in court. Her answers became more uncertain with every question. Kellen eventually admitted that he believed selling the farmhouse would solve his financial problems and provide him with money he could never earn on his own. Hearing those words ended any remaining hope I had for our marriage. The man standing across the courtroom was no longer the husband I thought I knew. After the hearing ended, I quietly told my attorney that I wanted to begin the divorce process immediately. It was not an emotional decision made in anger. It was a decision made because trust had been completely destroyed. As Briggs and I walked out of the courthouse together, I felt sadness for the life I had lost, but I also felt relief because the truth had finally been recognized by the people who mattered most. Life slowly became peaceful again after the court case was finally over. Briggs and I returned to our normal routine without wondering what letter might arrive in the mailbox or who might try to challenge our right to stay. We repaired the parts of the farmhouse that had been neglected during the long legal battle and spent our evenings enjoying the quiet our parents had always loved. My divorce was completed without any effort to rebuild a relationship that had already been broken beyond repair. I no longer carried the burden of wondering whether I had made the right choice because every event had shown me exactly where Kellen's true loyalty had been. Corinne was held responsible for her actions and could no longer use false claims to gain control of the property. Some relatives later came to apologize for believing stories without asking for the truth first. I accepted their apologies, but I understood that forgiveness did not mean forgetting everything that had happened. Briggs often reminded me that our parents had worked their entire lives to give us a safe place to call home, and it was now our responsibility to protect that gift. Standing on the front porch one quiet evening, I looked across the fields and felt something I had not felt in a very long time. The fear was finally gone. I realized that real victory was never about making anyone suffer. It was about protecting our family home, keeping our parents' promise alive, and proving that honesty will always stand stronger than greed when people refuse to give up on the truth.